On June 21st, 1961, the Coast Guard cutter Woodrush sighted something strange on Lake Superior. An ominous plume of black smoke lumbering toward the sky over Stannard Rock. As they drew closer, the stone lighthouse came into view, shrouded in an eerie silence. The tower looked more like a chimney, belching out a steady stream of smoke from where its light once shined. On the ledge outside the tower, 3 exhausted men clung to life. The 4th keeper was nowhere to be found. These men were the last to ever live and work at Stannard Rock Lighthouse, a desolate tower nicknamed the loneliest place on Earth. The Ojibwe people called it Gitchigumi, which roughly translates to the Great Sea. French explorers called it Le Lac Supérieur, the Upper Lake. That name seemed to stick. Lake Superior, the largest, northernmost, and westernmost of the Great Lakes, is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area, and the 3rd largest by volume. It holds 13% of the world's fresh water. While for centuries indigenous tribes used the lake for fishing, travel, and trade, Western settlers were slow to expand their shipping to Lake Superior. The opening of the Sioux Locks in May 1855 greatly expanded access and shipping traffic on the lake. By the mid-1800s, schooners and steamboats became a common sight, as the region's natural resources became more valuable. Each of the Great Lakes present their own challenges to navigators, and Lake Superior quickly proved unpredictable and deadly. In 1835, Captain Charles C. Stannard of the vessel John Jacob Astor discovered a vast underwater mountain 25 miles west of the Keweenaw Peninsula. The rocky ledge extends a quarter of a mile and sits between 4 and 16 feet below the surface, presenting a serious danger to shipping. As traffic increased, it was clear that a marker was needed to warn navigators of the hidden rocks, which lay just south of the busy Sioux to Duluth shipping lanes. But no one knew if it would even be possible to establish a sufficient beacon in such a challenging environment. The nearest land sits 25 miles away, far out of visual range. None of the rocks sit above the lake's surface, meaning that any structure would have to be built in the turbulent waters of Lake Superior. In 1868, the Lighthouse Service devised a test to determine whether it would be possible to build a structure in such a challenging location. They determined the shallowest rock surface and constructed a 12-foot diameter stone crib, on top of which sat a 20-foot high, 6-foot diameter iron beacon. Then, they waited to see what the elements would do to the temporary structure. To their relief, through months of gale-force winds, rain, snow, and ice, the tower held. Not long after, in 1874, construction wrapped on a similar lighthouse on Spectacle Reef, 11 miles east of the Straits of Mackinac on northern Lake Huron. Designed by Colonel Orlando Metcalf Poe and Major Godfrey Weitzel, the Spectacle Reef Lighthouse was the most expensive lighthouse ever built in the Great Lakes. The incredible engineering achievement was considered a great success and created a blueprint for similar stone towers, just like the one being considered on Lake Superior. It wouldn't be easy, but a lighthouse could be built on Stannard Rock. More than 150 lighthouses were built on the Great Lakes between 1870 and 1890. The region's natural resources were vital to the nation's rapid industrialization. As commercial shipping boomed, Taming the treacherous inland seas was critical to safely and reliably transporting iron ore, coal, limestone, and other materials throughout North America. In the days before radar and GPS mapping, lighthouses played a key role in navigation. In 1877, Congress appropriated $50,000 to begin construction on a new lighthouse at Stannard Rock. Crew and equipment used to build the Spectacle Reef Lighthouse were shifted to Lake Superior in 1878. A camp was established near Skaney, Michigan, 51 miles southwest of the Rock. Called Standardsville, the camp included barracks, offices, workshops, docks, and storage. Crews started by building a massive concrete base or crib which could support the tower. The base would be built on a carefully selected rock that sat approximately 12 feet below the lake's surface. To build the base, a wrought iron casing was placed around the sides of what would soon be the foundation, 62.5 feet in diameter, fitted closely to the rocks. The structure was lined with canvas pipe filled with oakum, made from tarred fibers, which were placed under its bottom edge to make it watertight. Water was then pumped out and the rocks were cleaned before the container was filled with concrete to form a 35-foot-high foundation. As the crib came together, the tower's sandstone blocks were quarried at Kelly's Island on Lake Erie and transported to Standardsville by barge. Each block weighed between 12 and 30 tons. The tower was then built on shore to ensure that every stone block fit together perfectly. Once the foundation was complete, the tower was disassembled and hauled over to the reef, where it was carefully put back together again over the course of 2 months. Huge iron drift pins were used to secure each block to the one below, further strengthening the intricately designed tower. The structure took over 5 years to build and cost more than $300,000. Bad weather and ice flows made the project incredibly difficult. Crews could only work from May to October, and they spent each spring repairing damage from the previous winter. Even during the summer, weather halted work over and over again. The 1878-79 season was particularly brutal, with crews only able to work 61% of the time. Still, the tower came together as planned and only went $5,000 over budget. 126 tons of iron, 76 tons of brick, 1,270 tons of tower stone, and 7,276 tons of concrete were used to complete the base and the tower. It's still considered one of the top engineering feats ever completed in the United States. The tower at Stannard Rock stands 78 feet tall on top of a 35-foot base. Its walls start at 7.5 feet thick at the base and taper to 22 inches at the lens room. The focal height is 102 feet or 31 meters. The tower consists of 7 levels with 2 sublevels in the basement. The first holds the galley, followed by sleeping quarters, a library reading room, a watch room, and finally a lens room. In addition to the tower, a structure was built to house the fog signal, engines, and boilers. The crib also held 2 10-inch steam whistles and a boat crane. The Stannard Rock Lighthouse was first illuminated on July 4, 1882. Its light sat inside a second-order beehive Fresnel lens with 12 bullseye prisms that sent a beam pattern 25 miles out. It was one of the most remote stations in the entire United States Lighthouse Service. Life in the tower was a nightmare. The first keeper stationed at Stannard Rock was John Pask, who transferred from Sturgeon Point Light on Lake Huron. Why he traded one of the Great Lakes' most pleasant stations for one of its most brutal is anyone's guess. He lasted at the lonely station only a year before he was transferred to the idyllic Michigan Island Lighthouse on the Apostle Islands. To entice keepers to Stannard Rock, the Lighthouse Service usually allowed them their pick of assignments once they finished working at the desolate outpost. Not only was the crushing isolation difficult, the weather conditions at Stannard Rock could rattle even the toughest man's nerves. Massive 30-foot waves frequently smashed over the tower, and gale-force winds were a constant threat. A single gust could easily sweep a man off his feet and into Lake Superior. Once in the water, there was almost no hope of rescue. If anything went wrong, whether it be illness, an accident, or some other emergency, keepers had to wait days or even weeks before they could flag down a passing ship and get assistance. At most lighthouses in the United States, keepers and their assistants were able to live with their families. But Stannard Rock was considered too unsafe for women and children, and it was designated a stag station where only men could serve. Keepers deemed the lighthouse the loneliest place on Earth. Obviously, turnover was extremely high. The lighthouse operated from spring to early December. Keepers would return to the light when the ice thawed enough to allow shipping to resume, typically between March and May. Landing at the lighthouse is difficult even in idyllic conditions, but at the start of the season, keepers had to contend with thick layers of ice, sometimes up to 2 feet deep or more. They had to use sledgehammers and pickaxes just to clear the door of the tower. The backbreaking and dangerous work often took hours, sometimes even days. One storm in 1913 left the tower encased in 12 feet of ice. It took 12 men with pickaxes and steam pipes a full week to clear away the ice and rescue the men trapped inside. Stannard Rock was manned by 1 keeper and 3 assistants. The longest-serving head keeper was Lewis Wilkes from Marquette. He manned the station from 1936 to 1956. He also holds the record for the longest continuous stay at the lighthouse, 99 days. His assistant, Elmer Sormanen, remained at the lighthouse from 1934 to 1954. Typically, men were rotated, 3 weeks at the lighthouse and 1 week off. From the comfort of your home, you might think it dramatic to call the lonely outpost a hellish place to live. But it's unlikely that you've ever experienced anything like what a keeper at Stannard Rock lived with, completely cut off from the outside world. The crushing isolation, the wind and waves and nothingness, the smashing roar of passing storms, the droning foghorn, days of nothing but back-breaking labor, bland canned meat, endless games of solitaire. Life on Stannard Rock was beyond what most of us could ever imagine. Still, they persevered, keeping the light shining through the worst that Lake Superior had to offer. For 60 years, the quarters in the tower's powerful beacon were lit with various flammable illuminants. The lighthouse was not electrified until 1944, when generators and an array of batteries were installed, along with a 500-watt light bulb that replaced the old oil vapor lamp. A small motor was installed to rotate the light. Even with the modern equipment, men were still needed to maintain the light. While keeping the beacon lit was significantly easier, life on Stannard Rock was still a constant challenge. By the summer of 1961, the days of the lighthouse keeper were numbered. Lighthouses all over the world were being automated, and this was Stannard Rock's last season of manned operation. Already, a 23-year-old electrician's mate, Oscar Daniels, was posted at the lighthouse station, living and working alongside the keepers. His job was to repair a generator and prepare the light for automation the following season. On the morning of June 18, 1961, Stannard Rock's last head lightkeeper, 34-year-old bosun mate Walter M. Patterson, was on leave. Manning the lighthouse was 35-year-old engineman First Class William Maxwell, 22-year-old seaman Walter Scobie, and 18-year-old seaman Richard Horn. By now, life on Stannard Rock was considerably more comfortable. The men had electric lights, a refrigerator, radio, and even a small TV. Still, it was a lonely and dangerous job. It was a quiet morning. The weather was calm, and the lake was smooth. Walter Scobie was just waking up when suddenly a massive explosion threw him from his bunk on the fourth deck, followed by a rush of heat and flames. As the room filled with billowing smoke, Walter raced down 2 decks to check on his fellow keepers. He found Oscar Daniels dazed on the floor, his legs shattered by a wooden door that exploded in the blast. Walter did his best to attend to Oscar's injuries, but it was clear that they needed to get out of the burning tower as quickly as possible. Fortunately, the thick windows, built to withstand gale force winds and punishing waves, had blown out, giving the men an avenue of escape. They managed to climb out the window and scale a pipe down to the lighthouse's base. The tower looked more like the chimney of a huge factory, belching out a steady stream of thick black smoke. Suddenly, Walter realized that there were 2 men missing. He asked Oscar if he knew where they were. Still dazed, he told him that Richard Horn had gone to the boat. The lighthouse had a small wooden boat, but the blast sent it flying into the lake. Now, its shattered remains were floating away. After the blast, Richard Horn, still dizzy from the explosion, dove into the 40-degree lake to try and retrieve the boat. In his mind, it was their only means of escape. But as the injured man swam away from the lighthouse, the boat only drifted further and further from his reach. Walter saw the man swimming away and called after him. "You'll never catch it," he screamed. Richard was exhausted. He nearly went under when he heard Walter calling to him and came to his senses. Walter threw him a life ring, but it missed. He tried again, this time hitting Richard's hand. He was able to grab a hold, and Walter pulled him to the ladder and helped lift him out of Lake Superior. The 3 men were safe, but one was still missing: 35-year-old William Maxwell. The tower's entry was engulfed in flames, making it impossible to go inside and search. Even if they could, they knew that the blast came from the tower's base, where William was working. It was unlikely that he could have survived. Now, all the 3 men could do was wait. For most of Stannard Rock's history, the men who worked there were completely cut off from the outside world. Their only means of communication would be visual signals from passing ships. But by 1961, radio equipment was finally installed, and the lighthouse made 2 calls a day to Station Marquette to check in and provide updates. The explosion completely destroyed the radio equipment. With no way to call for help, all the men could do was wait. The fire from the explosion burned for 3 hours before the flames eventually died down, but the tower smoldered for days, sending an ominous plume of smoke into the sky. Walter, Richard, and Oscar had no idea how long it would be before they were rescued. They found a tarp and fashioned a makeshift shelter on the south side of the lighthouse. Then they searched the wreckage for food, but all they could find was 2 bottles of ketchup and a single can of beans. They spent their days trying to stay warm while watching the horizon for any passing ship. At night, Walter would climb the tower and send out SOS signals through the lens using a flashlight. This routine lasted for 3 days. Finally, the Coast Guard buoy tender Woodrush appeared on the horizon and sent out a boat to rescue Walter, Richard, and Oscar. They were saved, but William Maxwell was not so lucky. The 35-year-old father of 2 was working in the base of the tower when the explosion occurred. He was likely killed instantly. What set off the blast remains a mystery. The Coast Guard repaired the damaged lighthouse and finished preparing it for automation. The massive Fresnel lens was removed and replaced with a modern plastic optic. Stannard Rock would never be manned again. The Fresnel lens was taken to the Coast Guard station at the Sioux before vanishing. Its whereabouts remained unknown for over 30 years, before it was finally discovered in the basement of the Coast Guard Academy in New London, Connecticut. How it got there is a mystery. In 1999, it was transported back to the Great Lakes, where it was carefully reassembled and put on display at the Marquette Maritime Museum, where you can still pay it a visit today. The Stannard Rock Lighthouse still stands. Despite an explosion and nearly 150 years of punishing wind, surf, and ice, the intricate stonework remains strong. The tower still holds an automated beacon, as well as a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, weather station, part of the federal government's network of stations that monitor weather across the United States. National weather forecasts are vital to navigation, aviation, storm preparedness, and our everyday lives. In 2015, ownership of the lighthouse was transferred to the Superior Watershed Partnership. The group is currently working to refurbish and preserve Stannard Rock. Today, the tower stands in solitude, its original purpose long since eclipsed. But still it holds firm, reminding us that there was a time when people were willing to put themselves through hell to keep their fellow man safe from the chaos of nature. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this one, support the channel with a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon and my channel members. Their support helps keep the channel afloat. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.